That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable.
The battle is not lost. Let us regain belief in the power of ideas, because only ideas can light the darkness. Liberty must survive, and it will survive, through ideas developed by the rising generation.
Alrighty, welcome to LibertyCon Day 2. Nice to see all of you. Thank you so much for being here. I've already been having a terrific morning. I hope you all have as well. We had a great time discussing the Department of Government Efficiency this morning and all the spectacular things it is up to, but there's a lot of great stuff on the docket for the afternoon. Spike Cohen is going to be speaking, Glenn Jacobs as well. You'll hear from Whole Foods CEO John Mackey, and then of course much later there is the awards dinner and alumni reception. Please stick around for that. If you haven't checked out the exhibition hall yet, you are encouraged to do so. Lots of great organizations to learn about, including my own organization, Reason. Me and some of the other Reason folks will be up here at 5:15, I believe, to talk about our work and the new media environment and everything that is happening in this crazy, crazy world. But immediately, it is my pleasure to introduce a young person from Students for Liberty to introduce our next speaker. Let's give him a round of applause.
How are you doing? My name's Aaron. I'm here to introduce Dr. Anthony Davies. He's a renowned economist and public speaker. He was a professor at Duquesne University. He's known for his engaging teaching style, and he makes complex economic concepts accessible to a wide audience via his Learn Liberty videos. I'm sure some of you guys have seen them here. He's contributed to numerous publications, including his own work on economic freedom and fiscal policy. He's the author of several books, including his most recent co-authorship, Cooperation and Coercion. Dr. Davies hosts a nonpartisan look at current events podcast called Words and Numbers, and he currently works in the financial sector. Please welcome Dr. Davies.
Good afternoon. Before I begin, the good people at Cato asked me to tell you that I'll be signing copies of my book, Understanding Statistics, after this talk at their booth. And apparently you can get a square on Liberty Bingo for having an author sign a book. I'm here to talk about monopolies. And are you seeing the slides? You're not seeing the slides. I'm going to sing and dance, apparently, until my slides come up. I did this last time. They had somebody else's slides. I'm here to talk about monopolies, and we economists use the term very strictly. I'm going to use it much more loosely than an economist should. When it comes to speaking English, economists cause more confusion than libertarians trying to explain privatized roads. We take reasonable words that come with all of the baggage that well-used words accumulate, and we redefine them to mean something completely different, and then we wonder why nobody understands what we're talking about. For example, take the word benefit. To any reasonable person, it means something that promotes well-being. Well, economists come along and they redefine this to mean the dollar value of the utility gained from consuming a specific quantity of a good or service. For those of you studying economics, this is why you don't get invited to parties. Monopoly is one such word. To the economists, this is a single price-setting seller. To everybody else on the planet, it's a big and likely bad company. And notice the emotive words here. In the minds of most people, monopolies are the dragons of the marketplace. Their power is feared and legendary. Our elders pass on tales from their elders about the times that monopolies swept in and devoured entire villages. As with dragons, you'll be hard-pressed to find somebody who's actually seen a monopoly. And that's because, like dragons, monopolies tend not to exist. Picture a spectrum. On one end, we have the natural monopoly, a single rent-seeking, profit-generating, inefficient behemoth. On the other end, we have perfect competition, a bustling bazaar of equality, homogeneity, zero economic profit. Somewhere along here, in their minds, people draw a line and they say, beyond here, there be monopolies. But in casually applying the term, we lose sight of what monopolies are and when they should and should not be feared. For example, is Apple a monopoly? It is the only producer of Apple products, so in that sense, it's a monopoly, but that sense is meaningless. We don't buy iPhones, iPads, and Macs because they're Apple products. We buy them because they're smartphones, tablets, and computers. And in this, Apple faces competition from Google, Samsung, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, and many others. In terms of monopoly versus competition, Apple tends to look a lot less like a dragon than it does one among a flock of squabbling pigeons. What about Google? Certainly, Google is a monopoly. The EU recently fined Google $2.7 billion for monopolistic behavior. Google handles 90% of the world's internet searches. Certainly, Google's a monopoly, but not so fast. The point of being a monopoly is that you get to charge those sweet, sweet high prices. But Google charges the not-so-stratospheric price of zero. Yes, we have to hand over our information when we use Google, but despite the fact that most of us would be horrified if our internet searches were made public, we continue to hand over our information in exchange for seeing cat videos and to creep on our exes. In terms of our behavior, we demonstrate that we place no value on our information. Therefore, from our perspectives, Google prices its product at zero. So Google, in the end, ends up looking also a lot less like the dragon than a squabbling apple pigeon. What about Amazon? If there is a modern-day exploiter like the company towns of old, certainly it's Amazon. Except Amazon faces competition. Competitors like Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Costco, all compete with Amazon. In fact, via eBay, anybody with an internet connection looking to unload their grandmother's china competes with Amazon. And Amazon doesn't just face competitors when it sells, it faces competitors when it hires. In Seattle, Amazon employs 90,000 people who complain about working conditions, but there are alternatives. Boeing, Microsoft, the University of Washington, and thousands of other employers collectively hire 25 times the number of people who work at Amazon. I make no comment as to whether Amazon is a good employer. I merely point out the fact that in representing less than 5% of Seattle's workforce, Amazon is a competitor when it comes to hiring people. Amazon, Google, Apple, they're not what economists would call monopolies, but they are very large, very dominant firms. And that's what everybody else tends to mean when they use the word monopoly. So let's use people's common definition and ask the question, are monopolies, in the sense that common people mean it, are monopolies bad? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on why the company is a monopoly. And here something interesting emerges. It turns out there are two reasons a company might be a monopoly in the common sense of the word. One is that you've got a company that uses force. Someone, somewhere, has used force to prevent competition, to prevent competitors from selling, or alternatively, to force consumers into buying. Let's call this a coercive monopoly. For example, pharmaceutical companies use strategic patenting not to protect their intellectual property, but to make it more expensive for competitors to compete. Many states prohibit car manufacturers from selling directly to the public. This protects existing car manufacturers because a competitor can't enter the industry unless he already has an established network of dealerships. Public schools require you to pay for the education they provide, regardless of whether you send your children there. Coercive monopolies arise through a violation of property rights, either the property rights of competitors or the property rights of consumers. We're told that monopolies are a market failure. In fact, coercive monopolies are a government failure. Somewhere along the line, the government either failed to protect people's property rights or actively violated them. But there's another way a company can become a monopoly, and that is to provide a product, a service that is so good that consumers don't want to buy anywhere else. Let's call this a cooperative monopoly. Cooperative monopolies exist only by the grace of consumers, and they exist only so long as they continue to provide what consumers want at prices consumers are willing to pay. For example, Sears pioneered mail-order lending. 4 times a year, it would send catalogs to every household in the country. These 1,000-page tomes contained listings for kitchen utensils, clothing, furniture, appliances, tools, toys, cars, even entire houses. At its height, Sears, all by itself, was 1% of the entire US GDP. And people became concerned. They became concerned because this was a dominant company. But they were concerned because they forgot why it was a dominant company. Sears was not a coercive monopoly, it was a cooperative monopoly. And this became clear in the 1980s when Sears' quality started to drop off and its prices to rise. And along came Walmart. Walmart provided the same wide selection of products that Sears provided, but whereas Sears periodically would offer low prices, Walmart guaranteed everyday low prices. And people cheered, and they withheld their dollars from Sears and offered their dollars to Walmart. But soon the cheers turned to gasps as people realized that Walmart had become the dominant seller. People saw a greedy Walmart shutting down mom and pop shops across the country. And people clamored for the government to do something. Except Walmart wasn't to blame. Walmart hasn't closed a single mom and pop shop. We did that. We did it when we chose to withhold our dollars from the mom and pop shops and hand them instead to Walmart. We had no reason to fear Walmart. It wasn't a predator. It isn't a predator. We feared it because we forgot why it was a dominant firm. Walmart, in the common sense of the term, was a cooperative monopoly, not a coercive one. This should have become clear when then Amazon came along. And Amazon offered wide selection of products, low prices, and at-home delivery. And what did we do? We withheld our dollars from Walmart and we offered them to Amazon instead. If Amazon is a monopoly, it's a cooperative monopoly, not a coercive one. And that means that somewhere, right now, there is an entrepreneur devising a new retail service that in 5 years will challenge Amazon and in 10 replace it as a dominant retailer. Cooperative monopolies are good because they arise from choice. Coercive monopolies are bad because they arise from force. So what do we know? First, most of the popular examples people point to of monopolies aren't. Second, it doesn't matter that there's only one firm. It matters why there's one firm. Third, coercive monopolies represent missed opportunities. There exists today coercive monopolies that, had they not for decades received government protection, might well have evolved to solve several problems that face us now. These are labor unions. There's nothing wrong with or anti-market about a labor union. If investors can come together to form a corporation, if worshipers can come together to form a church, if nerds can come together to form a Star Trek fan club, there's nothing wrong with workers getting together to form a union. Unions aren't the problem. Government protection of unions is. For example, in 1931, the Davis-Bacon Act required that the federal government pay non-union workers the same as union workers. This made it harder for non-union workers to compete. The 1935 Wagner Act prevented rival unions from creating competition. Therefore, if you today are a union member and you are dissatisfied with your union, the Wagner Act prohibits you from shopping around for an alternative one. In protecting unions from competition, the government made it more profitable for unions to please regulators than to please their members. As a consequence, unions have evolved to become much more skilled at lobbying than at providing value. But what if unions hadn't been protected? What if, like Sears, then Walmart, now Amazon, unions had to convince people to join rather than force them? What might have happened? One thing that might have happened is that unions might well have solved our health insurance problem. They could have evolved to provide health insurance for all Americans. Your health insurance would follow you, whether you worked here or worked there or didn't work at all, because your insurance would be attached to you, not your employer. This would have eliminated the pre-existing condition problem that spurred the Affordable Care Act under the Obama administration. Unions, had they not been receiving government protection for decades, may have evolved to use market forces to solve what the Affordable Care Act claimed to and failed to solve by fiat. Another thing unions might have done is to solve our tuition problem. You don't need a degree to be a plumber, an electrician, or a carpenter, but you also don't need a degree to be an accountant, a manager, a marketer, a financial analyst, a web developer, a graphic designer. You can learn what you need to do for those jobs in 1, possibly 2 years of coursework. The reason employers look for degrees is because colleges and universities refuse to certify you as proficient unless you pay for 4 years worth of courses, half of which are irrelevant to your job. And by the way, colleges can get away with this because through a combination of the accreditation system and student loans, colleges themselves are government-protected monopolies. Unions could have evolved to provide education for white-collar workers across the country. We've talked about good monopolies and bad monopolies. What about the hidden monopolies? In 2016, many voters thought Hillary a power-hungry egotist and Trump a crazy person. But Americans held their noses and voted. In 2020, Americans thought Biden a doddering closet racist and Trump a crazy person. But Americans held their noses and voted. In 2024, Americans thought Harris a socialist authoritarian and Trump a crazy person. But Americans held their noses and voted. In election after election, Americans left, right, and center have come to suspect that something about our electoral process is broken. We point to the Electoral College. We point to winner-take-all voting. We point to campaign financing. We point to the two-party system. But none of these is the problem. The problem with our electoral system is dragons. The Democratic and Republican parties are not governmental bodies. They are corporations and government-protected coercive monopolies. For example, in Georgia, to appear on the presidential ballot, third-party candidates must obtain signatures from 5% of registered voters. Democratic and Republican candidates require no signatures. In Illinois, to appear on the ballot, third-party candidates are required to obtain 25,000 signatures. Democratic and Republican candidates are required to obtain 5,000. Taxpayer money is readily available for Democratic and Republican campaigns, but not third-party campaigns. The Commission on Presidential Debates decides which candidates may appear on nationally televised debates, and they routinely exclude third-party candidates. But the Commission on Presidential Debates itself is not a governmental body. It is a nonprofit corporation sponsored by the Democratic and Republican parties. Monopolies aren't the dragons we think they are. Cooperative monopolies are good. They're a blessing, not a curse, because they represent companies that are providing things consumers want at prices that consumers are willing to pay. Coercive monopolies, on the other hand, are a curse. They exist because someone somewhere has violated competitors' and consumers' property rights. But these aren't the real dragons. The real dragons masquerade as government itself. They offer candidates, but only their candidates. They encourage debate, but only among each other. They ask us to vote, but only for people they have chosen. These monopolies, the Democratic and Republican parties, are the dragons we should fear, because they do far worse than co-opt the rule makers They are the rule makers. Thank you.